prezentarea este în engleză, doar o secundă să o încarc.
Da, și dacă îți va fi mai confortabil, te rog să folosești engleză. Cei care ne urmăresc sunt familiarizați cu limba de business principală, să spunem.
Da, îmi spui dacă se vede prezentarea.
Se vede, acum este în full screen, da.
Ok.
Acum
deci
nu mai este în full screen, se vede, de fapt se văd notițele. Mai devreme un pic era în regulă. Acum e în full screen la noi.
Ok, mulțumesc. Deci primul slide, am făcut un slide despre energy transition, pentru că toată lumea vorbește despre această energy transition. Și practic am încercat să cuantifiez cât se investește anual în această energy transition. So Bloomberg last year quantified that 2021 was a record year in energy transition. The total investments worldwide, stood at $755 billion US. This is in a year where we had COP26 in November and the EU adopting the Energy Fit for 55 package. So I would think like this is really a super relevant figure. 2022 is expected to exceed the energy transition investments of last year. So hold on for another year of big investments. Out of this energy transition package, let's call it, we have renewable energy. Of course, renewable energy is most of the investment. It's roughly half of it. And last year it was $366 billion. But this is not the most rapid growing sector. The most rapid growing sector is the electrified transport. And this sector was at 273 billion, and it grew by 77% last year. And because of the growth rate is expected to exceed the renewable energy sector in 2022. And then I also added the new technologies such as the green hydrogen, the carbon capture and storage, sustainable materials, and also the energy storage. But this is not very significant. It's less than 5%, but still is expected to grow in the next few years significantly. You can see here the Bloomberg chart of the split between all these sectors in the energy transition. Then I have a slide on what I think is the main obstacles, main barriers, which can accelerate renewable deployment. And I would say the first barrier is the stop and go policy of the government. If you think about it, Western Europe, in Western Europe, when they have CFD or auctions, they have kind of a scheduled auction for 5 to 10 years. This is what we have to do in emerging market as well. We have to have a continuous policy to support renewables, not a stop and go like we experience in our region. Then the next biggest challenge is the lack of the grid availability. We all know in Romania, Transelectrica and all the distribution system operators need to invest heavily in their network to be able to absorb the intermittent renewable power. And then the third thing, which I think is quite relevant, is the bankability of the off-taker. Everyone is talking about long-term PPA, bilateral PPAs, but it's very difficult to find bankable off-takers for 10-year. If you think about the banks who are financing this project financing, they need to have a PPA of 7 to 10, maybe even 12 years PPA. And it's very difficult to find an off-taker which is financially credible, but also willing to enter into PPA in 2 years' time at the COD of the renewable, when the renewable plant is commissioned. And last but not least is the balancing cost. Balancing costs are an issue in Romania and in many other countries in our region. And then I have, I tried here to summarize all the sources of equity and debt which we can see in the renewable world, and not only in the renewable world, but also we'll see them in the energy storage, in the green hydrogen, in all the new technologies which are to come up in the near future. And the first, I would like to mention the private equity funds. So we have private equity funds, but these expect a very high IRR, double digits IRR. So it's likely they will want to be involved in the project at the development stage, build the project, run it for a few years, and then flip it over to a strategic investor. Then we have the strategic investors, like energy companies, integrated energy companies, renewable energy companies, or companies who need to decarbonize, such as Shell, BP, Equinor, OMV, and also Complexul Energetic Oltenia in Romania, which has recently approved the reorganization. Brussels has recently approved their reorganization plan, their restructuring plan, and it's a very important milestone for the Romanian energy sector. Then I have noticed the infrastructure funds. So funds like Macquarie, DWS, they have access to much cheaper capital, much cheaper sources, so they can afford to stay there for a longer period than the private equity fund and look at lower returns than the private equity fund. Then we also have the pension fund, like all the famous pension funds in the world, and hopefully pension funds in our countries, like in Romania, will also be able to invest soon in renewable energy and new technologies. Then you have a mix. This mix is a platform between, let's say, a renewable developer, a fund, either a pension fund or an infrastructure fund, and an off-taker. And this kind of platform, the hybrid platform, offers a very competitive advantage. When you have an off-taker on board, you basically secure the off-take, the power off-take. You have the developer developing the project, you have the off-taker, and then the pension fund or the infrastructure fund putting in the equity. So basically you have all the ingredients for a successful financing story. Of course, you have the commercial banks and the investment banks, and this is the project finance, I would say the plain vanilla project finance, because now project finance is provided, it's like a service provided by all the lenders. So you have project finance with no recourse, but with a big and strong security package. All the assets are pledged in favor of the lenders. And then the newest trend now is the green bond and sustainability-linked bonds. So I would say more and more strategic investors prefer to raise green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds rather than project finance. Why? Well, because first of all, it's quicker. You don't have to look at project by project basis. You just put together a portfolio of assets, and then you go to the debt capital market and you raise a bond. And you don't have to care about financing agreements for each, negotiating a financing agreement for each individual project, but just look at the worldwide portfolio you have or a regional portfolio you have, and basically issue the bonds or the sustainability-linked bond. And a good example for this in our region is the PPC, sustainability-linked bond in Greece. When I was still with EBRD invested in this bond, and it was really a milestone for our region and something which maybe big corporates in our sector should look at and consider. And then, of course, I put the EU funds. I didn't list all of them, but I think there was plenty of information in this session about all the EU funds: Modernization Fund, Recovery and Resilience Fund, Innovation Fund, and all the other EU funds, which we hope to be able to tap into sooner rather than later.